Quilting lets you create and innovate. We can play with different styles, colors, and patterns. In this tutorial, we will learn how to make a herringbone quilting pattern. This pattern is also referred to as a broken twill or broken zigzag pattern. For this tutorial, you will need 4 printed fabrics of half a meter each. The size of the fabric depends on the length and the breadth of the final quilt. 1 piece of plain fabric of 1 meter. Cutting mat, quilting ruler, rotary fabric cutter, iron, thread, beaded pins and scissors. We are going to make a herringbone quilt pattern which is 29 inches long and 24.25 inches wide. For this we will need 2 8 by 8 inch square pieces of each printed fabric, 8 8 by 8 inch square pieces of the plain orange fabric. To learn how to cut these perfect square pieces, visit our website www.ushasew.com and go through the chevron quilt video. Quilting is all about creating blocks and replicating them. Let's get started with your first block. We will use the orange fabric and the printed fabric. Place the right side of the orange fabric on the right side of the printed fabric. We will be stitching all across the square piece as indicated. Use beaded pins to hold both the pieces of fabric together. Let's get sewing. Take the fabric to the Usha Janomi Memory Craft 6700P quilting machine. We have already kept the machine ready with the HP foot along with the HP plate. With the HP foot and plate, accurate stitches and perfect starts have gotten easier on any type of fabric. Set the machine to straight stitch and begin to sew all around the square. It's great for curves and precise stop stitching. Once you come towards the end of the side, stop the machine, lift the needle and turn the fabric and continue stitching. Repeat this process until all the sides of the square are stitched. Once all sides are stitched, remove the pins and let's go to the next step. This is how your stitches should look like. We now have to divide the square into 4 triangles. Take the quilting ruler and place it diagonally as shown in the video. Cut across the square with the help of a rotary fabric cutter. Repeat the same process in the other direction as well. This will give us 4 triangle pieces. Each triangle piece will have the stitch line at the bottom. We now have to repeat the same process with all the printed squares. Stitch them and cut them diagonally to get 4 triangles of each print as seen in the video. The next step is ironing. Take a triangle, open it. Iron the seam line correctly to flatten the seam and give the block a neat finish. We will have to repeat this process of opening and ironing the right side of the fabric with all the triangle pieces we created. Once you're done with ironing, we need a pair of scissors. See that extra fabric popping out of the corners? We need to trim that to give our squares a perfect finish. Make sure you cut both the corners of each square. Repeat this same process across all the square pieces created. Perfect! We have the squares ready. Let's start working on the pattern now. Lay out the squares as shown in the video. We will first lay one print at the extreme left. Match the orange strip of the first square with the orange strip of the second square. Match the printed side of the second square with the printed side of the third square. Ensure that the same print is placed next to each other to form a diagonal line. Match the plain strip of the third square with the plain strip of the fourth and the printed strip of the fourth with the printed strip of the fifth. See, it's that simple. Ensure there is uniformity. For the ease of sewing, place the first square over the second, right facing right, the third over the fourth, right facing right. The last square will be left as is. This piece will be attached last to this sequence. Pin the left sides of the first two sets and back to the sewing machine. Adjust the edge of one square under the presser foot. Do a straight stitch from the top to the bottom. Cut the thread, raise the presser foot. Now to the other square. Repeat the same process. This is how the squares should look like once they are stitched together. Open the first set of stitched squares and lay it next to the second set as shown. Make sure that the herringbone pattern is intact and the fabric is not upside down. Turn the first set of the stitched square onto the second set right side facing the right side. We are now going to join both these sets together. Place the left edge of the squares under the presser foot and do a straight stitch. Once done, cut the thread. Open the stitched pieces and lay them out. Now to the solar square fabric. Take the piece and match the design of the fabrics. Place the single square right side facing the right side onto the stitch row and do a straight stitch on the edge as shown. Our first row is ready. This is how the stitch will look from the right side of the fabric. And when you turn it around, this is how the seam will look like. We now need to open the seam with the help of our finger and flatten the seam allowance by ironing it. This will even out the fabric and flatten the allowance. Be careful of your fingers while using the hot iron. Flatten each and every seam to achieve the desired look. Done! Now to row number 2. Since we began with a print at the start of the first row, we will now begin with the plain orange fabric for the second row. Match the squares print to print and plain to plain as shown in the video. Lay out all the pieces of the second row. As pointed, see how the patterns are not in one line but broken? This is the herringbone pattern. Just like the first row, we will be sewing the second row. Keep the first square on the second, third on the fourth. Pin the fabrics together and sew as done earlier. have already created this row and ironed the seam allowances. This is how it should look. Ensure the pattern is correct and that you have stitched all the squares in the correct order. Let's join these two rows together. Place the top row on the bottom row, right side facing the right side. Make sure you match the seam line and pin it in place. Pin all the seam allowances to hold the fabrics in place. We will now be stitching on the pinned side. Align the edge of the fabric under the presser foot and begin sewing. Stop as you come to the end of one square. Remove the pin and flatten both the ends of the seam allowance. Make sure the stitches go across both the ends of the flattened seam allowance. Keep stopping, removing the pins and flattening the seam allowances and stitching till you reach the end of the fabric. Your two rows are now sewn together. This is how it should look like from the right side. This is how it should look like from the right side and the wrong side. Now turn the rows right side up. Move it to the top of the cutting mat. We have created two more rows in the same way. Place them one below the other. See how we have kept the pattern going? The plain orange strip always matches a printed strip. We will join all these three pieces together to create our final piece of quilt. Keep them right facing right. Match the seams and pin the bottom row and the top row to the center row. We just have to do two stitch lines, one at the top of the center row and one at the bottom of the center row. That's it! You have just created your first herringbone quilt. Get creative. Use different color combinations to make it stand out. It can be a wonderful highlight for your bed or a great piece of wall decor.